As I mentioned in the previous lesson, our goal is to refactor the getAllEvents function so that it will be retrieving the data from our events.json file, and this data will be consumed in our event manager controller and assigned to this .event list. So let's look immediately at what's required to refactor this function. The first thing we have to do is basically do events equals $http.get, which takes as a parameter the URL. In our case, it's just events.json, and eventually we can provide a config parm as well, but we're not going to do that. So this is simply it, and we're going to return the events. So are we sure that this will be sufficient to refactor our service, and especially should we make any change to our controller? Well, first of all, let's look at that and let's see what happens. As soon as I refresh my event list, there's no events being displayed, and if we look at the console, we definitely have an error. And the error says something like filter not array, so there's something wrong in the format of what we are assigning to the event list. Well, the reason is simple, because whenever we call the HTTP service, what we get back is a promise. I'm assuming you already know what a promise is, but basically it's something that stores the result of a call to an asynchronous web service. A promise can have three statuses, which are pending, so it's still waiting for a response, fulfilled, it got a response back, or rejected, it means that there was something wrong. In order to access the result of our promise, we need to do something else. And what we can do in our controller is to use the .then functionality, and that takes as a parameter a set of functions. The first function is when the promise is successful, the second one is when the promise is rejected. So we'll deal with something like errors. So let's see what we can do. Let's start by typing our function. The first one, we can just think about the success function because we are confident in this at the minute that the result will be returned. And let's see what we get back. So in the function we'll have some data, and the first thing we want to do is to log the data to the console, just to look at that together. And we're going to remove this assignment for now as well, so we won't get any error. Our data is an object that contains a config object with some params. We have the headers, we have the method, we have the param serializer, transform request, transform response. Those are all stuff that you can look at in the HTTP service. You also have different functionalities, features that to modify the headers that you send along your request. We're not going to look into each one of these for now. This is a subject for an advanced course and is beyond the scope of this lesson. But what we are interested in is instead the data that contains an array. So we have an object that we have provided, which is data, but what we were storing before wasn't the data object inside the data result. So what we need to do is simply this.event list equals data.data. So we are taking the whole object that we got back, and what we want is to get the data from the data object within it. So if instead of calling that data, we'll call it result, which makes more sense, we'll have something like result.data. And we are going to log the content of our event list. As you can see, we now have a log containing the objects, so we are sure that we have assigned everything properly, but we still have a problem. We don't see any data, right? Well, this is something we have already seen. We are using the this.event list inside the function, so what we're actually assigning is not what we want. It's not visible outside this function, so we'll use this once again, and it will be var self equals this, and the assignment will be self.event list equal to result.data. We now have all of our records. That's good. There's something else I want to show you. We said this was a promise, so what we do by using the then function is that we are basically defining that whenever we get a result back from our asynchronous function, we're going to do this assignment. I want to show you that we're actually dealing with an asynchronous function here, so I'm gonna add a few logs. So the first one will be console.log start. This will be self.event_list, and we'll have also another log, console.log, that will be end. When I save this file, what do you think will be our log? We have a start, we have an end, and then we have an object. But our object was in the middle, right? It was in the then function, line 59. So the end log should have been logged afterwards. Well, this is not true, because as I said, we're dealing with an asynchronous function and we're dealing with the HTTP service that will return a promise. So that promise won't be fulfilled immediately. Well, it might be, depending on the speed that is required to retrieve the data, the amount of data we are retrieving, but everything that will happen afterwards, so everything that comes in our code after this event factory.get all events will be executed anyways. So you need to be aware that if you are dealing with promises, you might not have already this assignment, and so if you might want to use this event list out straight after that, so console.log self.event list, this might not have been assigned yet. And let's just see if this is true. It's undefined. Another thing we might have done is to move this then function results and all that stuff back into our service. So we might do something like $http get events.json.then function data, as we did before, right? So we'll do an assignment here, so it will be events. We can remove the assignment from the very beginning. Events equals data.data. And then we're going to return our events to the caller, and that should be it. So I can maybe get rid of this .then in my results and do a direct assignment. So I'll do self.event_list equals event factory.get all events. Will it work? Oops, it won't. And the reason is quite simple. Well, in our service, even though we're using the then function, we are still returning a promise. So nothing will really change. We still need to use our then function in our controller as well. So let's bring that back. But what we can do by using this kind of syntax, by having a then function inside our service as well, is to actually modify the response. So let's consider this to be a response. That's our response. So if you remember, we were returning an object that contained multiple objects underneath it. We had the config objects, we had the data objects, and something else, but we're interested only in the data bit. So instead of doing every time inside our then function in the controller result.data, we'll do that before returning the response. So we'll do something like this. So we have our events response.data, and then we'll do return events. So maybe let's change the name to this one. It will be var data return data, and we are still returning the events promise. So why don't we add some logs so I can show you what I mean. So we have our declaration in here that will be var events equals the HTTP get, so console.log start get. We do our declaration. In here we do console.log returning initial promise. And we have another log before returning our data that will be returning fulfilled promise. Let's see what happens now. Instead of doing result in our controller.data, we'll do just result, because we no longer need to access the sub-object. Now, magically, our code works. And if we look at the log, we have a start get, returning initial promise. So we call the HTTP service, our getAllEvents returns the promise to the controller, and then when the promise is fulfilled, when the data is returned, there will be another log returning the fulfilled promise, right? So you don't notice anything? When the user accesses the screen, the manage events, the first time, for a moment we have no data. There's a way to resolve that. Well, actually I already said that. It's called resolve, and it's something we need to do in our routing. We'll see how to do that in the next lesson quickly before going back to services.